Hello summoners, and welcome back to another episode of Pro Guide's Best Champion to Main, now on patch 11.2. These champions are all about high performance and low ban rates that are unlikely to get nerfed in the immediate future. The most reliable picks in the game that are most worthy to invest time in. My name is Nathan Ning, and we're just gonna go ahead and hop right into this. Starting things off in the top lane, we have Kled. Already a strong pick last season, he's been sitting right near the border of OP with the new items. If you like to play as aggressive as possible, chasing down opponents every chance you get, then Kled is the champion for you. His Q's powerful heal reduction makes him a great duelist in the current meta, where healing is so rampant. Sure, Grievous Wounds are easily accessible via items on all champions now, but Kled has them at level 1, and at a full 60% effectiveness. This allows him to build into his other items quicker. One thing to note though is that despite him being a naturally anti-healing duelist, Kled is not a counter to Fiora. If you're gonna main him, do yourself a favor and ban her every single game. Kled's W gives him a good burst of damage during trades, so make sure that you're fighting around its cooldown. One trick a lot of good Kled players use is waiting to level up W until they can make it a guaranteed trade on their lane opponent. They leave the skill point unused, and once they hit the Q on the enemy laner, they E onto them and then level W, and trade like normal. This prevents you from putting it on its dreadfully long rank 1 cooldown. When it comes to using your E, there are two things to know. 1. Kled is fully designed as a champion to go into fights and not out, so the first cast of his E can't go over terrain. But the second cast can, meaning that you can have a way to follow your opponent over a wall if they flash away. With that in mind, you want to hold off on casting the second part of your E until they do, or until it's about to expire, so you don't have to waste your own flash to chase them. Once you have your ultimate, you can of course use it on the 1v1 with your lane opponent. But if you're the type of player that likes to spread the wealth, you can also use it to roam and dive mid lane, or recall back to base, walk bottom, and lane gank against overextended opponents. Once it comes to the team fight, Kled's kit punishes you for running away, but rewards you for fighting until your last breath, true to his character. You'd be surprised at how often you can pull off a remount with just a sliver of HP left and turn a fight into a decisive victory for your team. While many champions in that given class feel at least somewhat similar in playstyle to other champions of the same class, Kled has a completely unique feel amongst the fighters due to his bursty trading pattern of his W, his dismount and remount mechanics, and the fact that he literally punishes you for running away like a coward. Speaking of, that brings us to today's question of the day. What's a champion that you think that has a completely unique feel to them? Let us know your answer in the comments down below. Our second pick is Gnar. His recent buffs have pushed him up in strength, but in a way that has made him a better duelist in extended fights without tipping him too far into being an unhealthy lane bully. With skilled usage of everything that he has to offer, you can cut your opponents or chase him down when the time is right. Since Gnar shapeshifts, I'll give you a quick rough breakdown of each form separately. In mini form, Q's long range means that you can use it for harassing your opponent, but if you're just throwing out the boomerang to poke on its own, you aren't really making the most out of it slow. Instead, move up and use the fact that the other laner won't be able to make a move on you and just get the couple of autos in, proccing W for the bonus damage and movement speed to kite away. Since you're pretty fragile as mini Gnar, you want to refrain from using your hop until you're absolutely sure that there's no chance that you're being baited into a jungle gank, since it's also your way of escaping. In Mega form, you're much beefier but also less mobile, since you gain both base movement speed and the ability to double jump, but in return, you gain a huge amount of CC that you can bring to the table, in particular with the potential to land 5-man ultimates, making you a literal monster in team fights. Since Mega Gnar is fairly easy to kite, when it's time to take a team fight, you'll want to make sure that your rage bar is nearly filled up, and then either rely on a TP flank or having your flash up to start a fight. If neither of those are an option, it's usually best to split push until a better opportunity arises. The only thing more epic than a 5-man Gnar ult is subbing to our YouTube channel. It helps us out a ton and ensures that you never miss out on our meta guides or any of our other content. Our last pick for the top lane is Yorick. Split pushing is a pretty successful strat in solo queue where teams often lack coordination to shut you down in the side lane, and since Yorick can usually steamroll over anyone in the side lane at mid game, he's a perfect pick for you to enjoy that playstyle. That said, Yorick's early laning actually isn't the best. It's good, but it's not strong enough to outright bully champions right away. Instead, focus on securing last hits with your Q to keep spawning ghouls for their extra pushing power and the farming up until level 6. Once you do, your wife, or also the maiden, makes it impossible for the melee champions to even think about trading with you. Even then, you won't want to try so hard to force on your opponent. Instead, continue farming, and let the majority of your damage come from your ghouls jumping on the opponents that you hit with your E. Once you pick up an item or two and get out of laning phase, your job is to be as annoying as possible in the side lane. You won't even have to be fed to do this effectively. Even when you're relatively neutral in terms of gold, you can easily bully most champions that try to match you. It will result in you pushing down tower after tower, and if the enemy team tries to react by sending multiple members at you, the rest of your team should be able to answer with an objective on the other side of the map. You'll pretty much always make sure that you want to be split pushing in a side lane. Grouping as Yorick is usually weak, and it's usually more worth it to hope your team can hold a 4v5 at Baron while you split push for the inhib, rather than grouping up and most likely getting kited to death. If you absolutely must group up for a fight, make sure it's with the TP flank. Moving things on to the jungle, our first pick is Karthus. After some much needed nerfs to other champions and their items, he's been able to rise back up to the top, somewhat right on the border between S and A tier. He has a super fast clear, and you can actually full clear your entire jungle before rotating to whichever crap the enemy jungler did not take. If you do happen to find them doing crap, don't be afraid to concede it entirely. Remember, you're a hyper-scaling carry, so it's better to be a little bit behind than give your opponent a big enough lead to snowball all over you before you're able to make it to your ultra strong late game. Your main goal is to soak up all the farm that you can and avoid direct confrontation, instead relying on your ultimate to steal, help your teammates to secure kills. Once it comes time to team fight, don't be a KDA player. Make the most of your passive and the synergy it gives you with the last stand, getting you into the fight, dying in the middle of it, and putting out as much damage as possible. One of the new strat that's rising in popularity is to run exhaust over flash. There are some ups and downs to this, but the general idea is that you're able to exhaust the popular meta champions like Kha'Zix, Hecarim, and Olaf that have historically ran over Karthus when they find him in the jungle, and have a better chance of bringing them down with you. Just don't fall into the habit of running this every single game, especially if the opposing team is filled with ranged champions, not divers. You'll want Flash to be able to reach their carries. Our second pick is Fiddle. His clear is even faster than Karthus, with his W that lets you do 2 camps at the same time while remaining at full HP. While Fiddle may not have a global ultimate, he does in fact have much better ganks. Since his clear speed easily beats out pretty much every other champion in the game, he's able to spend a lot of his time pressuring lanes. With a point-and-click fear and a slow that silences, if your opponent has ever been overextended, you have a guaranteed CC to pick up some easy kills. The ganks get even more deadly once you reach level 6. Every time your ultimate is up, you should be able to be looking to force a gank somewhere. Since it can blink you over walls, you can even look to dive opponents under the safety of their turrets. Don't be afraid to do this, even if it ends up being a 1-for-1 trade. This is easily worth it, since your team gets assist gold and the laner ends up missing a couple of minion waves. Once it becomes time to team fight in the game around the objectives, you really want to make sure that you have vision control to ensure that you land the game-winning ultimates. Don't feel like you have to be the one to engage the fight every single time. Sometimes it's best to let your teammates fight it out and draw the enemy team in to land a fat ultimate on more targets. If you prefer a more supportive playstyle but want the early game map control of jungling, then you should be abusing Ivern. With his unique passive, you can actually spend practically no time actually jungling, since you just mark up camps and come back for them later. This leaves you with more time to babysit your lanes, ensuring that the teammates can make it safely to the team fighting phase of the game where you actually really come online. That being said, your early game isn't necessarily weak. While Ivern isn't great at dueling other champions in a 1v1 situation, his Q gives you a simple yet effective way to lock down foes, and ensures that your allies can get in range to follow up with the damage and CC of their own. Just be careful not to accidentally click the enemy that you rooted under their tower, or you'll end up being the one that dies. Everyone knows about the bushes that you can spawn with W, but an easily overextended part of the ability is the passive on-hit damage. Make extra sure that you dip into this one while you're fighting champions. 30 champions per hit when you're in the bush really adds up in the early game skirmishes. E lets you keep your allies alive, but it's not just a defensive shield. Slow is great for sticking to targets and sets you and your allies to land another CC when looking for kills. Once you're level 6, Daisy can be a huge help in executing ganks. You can throw your E on her so when she lands a slow without being in melee range of your opponents. Some players ignore Daisy in teamfights, which means that she'll likely get more several AoE knockups in a row. One thing to note for Ivern's items, we recommend Moonstone Renewer because of the impact that the constant healing has in teamfights. But if you want a more aggressive or snowballing option, Imperial Mandate is a lot more powerful in the early game. Aside from landing your Q and telling Daisy who to attack, Ivern has basically no mechanics to worry about, making him a champion that's entirely dependent on jungle pathing and macro to win the games. Thankfully, those are some of the most teachable parts of League, so be sure to head over to ProGuides.com, where you can find our top tier coaches that can help you learn to abuse Ivern like a challenger player. Now for some mid laners. We'll start off with Galio, whose easy to pilot kit and ability to counter all assassins that are so popular in the current meta make him a great champion right now that anybody can pick up. While he's on the beefier side of mid laners, don't mistake Galio for a true tank. Our build makes it so that you're more burst mage than tank, just with the added bonus of being able to engage fights when he needs to. His passive and Q give him constant wave clear, so if your opponent won't fight you, you can just roam to assist your jungler or gank other lanes. When it comes to fighting, your E and W can be an easily landed CC chain that lets you lock an opponent in place for several seconds. And since you're running Nimbus Cloak, even if you flash with your E, you can easily flash and follow with W's taunt. Just be sure that you're able to get aggression early on your own, since dashing in with E means that you're pretty open to being ganked. Instead, try to rely on getting a gank from your jungler, or moving to them and making a play on the enemy jungler. Once you have your ultimate, your semi-global ability helps you pull off the 4-man gank spot lane, or just rotate to jungle skirmishes well before your lane opponent can. It's also a great counter to team-wide magic damage ultimates like Varus and Karthus, thanks to the magic shield that it grants. So don't forget to use it to mitigate things like that. Our second mid laner is Kennen. While he's traditionally played as a top laner, mid Kennen is actually doing a lot better due to better matchups, allowing him to survive or even win lane more consistently and becoming a great team fighting monster. For laning phase against ranged champions, you'll generally look to farm it out, focusing on wave management and playing passively, while waiting for jungle ganks to go aggressive. When laning against melee champions, that is a completely different story, constantly harassing them with non-stop autos and a Q poke. Just be careful about not going too ham with your E usage, as it's better to take smaller calculated trades than just auto attacks and Qs. Always have your E available to make an escape if you get ganked. Once you're level 6, you can look to one-shot your lane opponent or roam to either top or bot lane if your opponent is playing respectfully. Your goal is to make it to team fights without being behind, and to find an angle to flank from that allows you to blow up the entire backline. Make sure that you swap to red trinket and invest in control wards. If the enemy team face checks you while you're camping in a bush, landing a huge 5-man ultimate can result in instantly deleting half your team, leaving the rest of them low for you guys to clean up. Like Kennen, Gragas is another pick who's much better in the mid lane than his traditional role, in this case as a jungler. He has strong dueling, great wave clear, 3 types of CC, and once you reach the mid game, he can work like an assassin, one-shotting any squishy champion that he can land a full combo on. His passive sustain lets you heal a lot to shrug off harass and heal up between trades, while Q gives you both strong wave clear and poke, making you a tough laner for both melee and ranged champions alike to deal with. When you're looking for bigger trades, make sure that you're using your W before slamming with your E. The damage reduction and empowered auto ensures that you never have to be on the short end of the stick with the bursty trades. Once you hit 6, your ultimate opens up new avenues to outplay your opponent. I mentioned earlier that you can one-shot your opponent once you reach the mid game, but you can also go solo kills on your laner if you're able to use your ultimate to push them to your tower, or for some real style points, get them with the fully charged Q. A really nice thing about Gragas compared to the other AP mid laners is that he functions more like a bruiser in the early game. This makes him really strong in those early scuttle fights that can sometimes decide the pace of the entire game. One thing to know about the build that we have here: if you have trouble with mana management, you can pick up a tier during laning phase, but if that's not enough, Luden's Echo can be built in place of Night Harvester. This will give you better wave clear, but weaker burst early game. Now let's take a look at the bot lane. We'll start off with some things with a familiar face in Ashe. She seems like she's always rather pretty good or really OP, due to her mix of lane bullying in the early game, high utility, and late game hypercarry DPS. In lane, her 600 auto range and her W's poking out power and wave clear let her dominate almost any lane. When you're playing against engaged supports, you want to be really abusive of your slowing autos and high range early game to poke them out as much as possible before they get the lead on you and snowball in. If you're really sweating about winning lane, you can swap your rune to Arcane Comment and Scorch. Just bear in mind that our Lethal Temple build is going to give you a much better teamfighting DPS. Make most of your hawkshot to scout where the enemy is, which camp he has up, or if possibly you're being cheated with a lane gank. Sivir has been sitting between the middle of the pack and pretty bad for a while, but in the last couple of patches, she's been on the rise. And with Essence Reaver getting a slight buff, Sivir's mana will be more manageable, and we think that she's worth maintaining now. Her Q and W give her more solid pushing capabilities, allowing you to quickly clear out of minion waves, soaking up all the farm that you need to become a hyper carry from your 3-item spike. While Sivir may not have a dash or blink, her spell shield and movement speed from passive allow her to evade most threats. Like Ashe, Sivir's ultimate has a huge deal of utility, but instead of making somebody pick one champion, it allows you to pull the trigger on your entire team to force them to run in the fray. It's especially useful for enabling champions like Hecarim and Olaf who just want to dive into the enemy team. For your carries early to mid game, your game plan is to pretty much farm as much as you can to reach your 3-item power spike. You can also fight around objects as needed, but aside from that, try to avoid pointless, overly forced fights. And as a general rule of thumb, regardless of what stage of the game you're in, if you don't have your ultimate, you shouldn't be team fighting. A bit of change up from last patch with Miss Fortune build that we covered in the previous videos. Instead of being focused on annoying poke, this Rampage setup gives you more hard-hitting auto attacks. Emma's passive makes her really good at short bursty trades, and combined with her QS, insane damage and killing a minion, it makes her a perfectly oppressive lane bully. On top of that, your ridiculous burst of damage. E's instant slow field means that you have to set up and deal with your ally to engage in the enemy team fights. While Miss Fortune may be technically an immobile champion, her W's passive gives her enough movement speed to dodge any incoming skill shots, so always be on your toes. Once you have your ultimate, you can go preferring shot bursting trades from 100 to 0 with your opponents. That's no exaggeration. When paired with a support like Leona or Nautilus that can lock down an enemy for a full channel of bullet time, you can literally kill them with just the press of the R, kind of like Karthus. And this only gets more deadly as the game goes on. Once you reach those mid to late game team fights, if your team has any AoE CC or the enemy team just chooses to fight in a choke point, your ultimate can level the entire team fight in seconds. Just pay extra attention to your positioning to line up that perfect shot. Now to round things out, we have our supports, starting with Sona. Her early game is definitely on the weaker side, but she makes up for it with the very powerful scaling as the game goes on. Her passive gives you a way to adapt to different situations. Most players tend to autopilot and either use them without even thinking about it, or specifically gravitating towards power chord with Q to do damage. That's certainly fine when you're just harassing, but don't underestimate the massive damage reduction that the power chord W gives. It can easily be the difference between whether or not you or your ADC survive after being dove by dangerous threats. Your Q always gives you a shiny bit of poke, so you can always pressure the other lanes, but don't get too carried away. Sona is incredibly squishy and is very susceptible to being one-shot if you overextend. And while Q lets you chip away at other laners, W allows you to sustain both. E's burst of move speed can help you chase a fight or escape from danger. Just make sure that you're not overextended before your teammates can catch up, as it's easy for champions without even just moderate damage to blow Sona up. Once you have your ultimate, you have the potential to add a lot of CC to a team fight, but since it's relatively slow moving projectile, it's probably best as a means to other peeling divers off your backline or as a follow-up to other teammates' engages. As you can see in our build, we think Archangels is the best item on Sona, as it really helps with the spamming mana later on into the game. Terror also helps a lot with mana in the early game, so don't be shy and buy it on your first pick, even if it slows down your mythic a bit. All that extra mana is easily worth it. Our second pick is to support Nami. While Sona is more of a concede lane to scale up to teamfights type of pick, Nami is an enchanter that can actually bully hard. All of her losing lane power is tied to her W, which gives some poke and a bit of sustain. If you want to be really good and get the most out of it, you want to start positioning in a way that W gets both bounces for maximum efficiency. Aside from that, your Q gives you some hard CC, but don't just go super aggro and throw it out every time it's off cooldown. Against many enchanters, this is fine, but against engaged supports, you'll want to hold your Q to disadvantage them. That way, when they try to go in, you can beat them. E's damage and slow are a foolproof way to help your ADC win trades faster, with the slow making it easier to land both your Q. Once you have your ultimate, you're able to take the bullying up to the next notch and start forcing all the fights and looking for kills. Alternatively, the massive AoE knockup and slow make for a great disengage tool when you need to make an escape. To finish things off, we have everyone's favorite jester of a support, Bard. Honestly, I personally hate this guy. His face looks like a bowling ball and there's holes in his face in the meeps, and that freaks me out. His very unique kit allows you to bully lane and look for roams to mid lane or to help your jungler during an invade. Even when you're not looking for a gank, make sure that you roam to gather your chimes for the mana and XP that they provide. Your Q gives you some pretty solid poking power in lane, but to get the most out of it, you'll definitely need to make sure that it's stunning your opponent. To catch a target off guard, instead of aiming directly at them to hit the minion first, maybe try hitting the second part of your Q to be that part that hits the enemy champion. The extended range can be easily surprising and can lead to good trades for you and your team to carry. Once you have your ultimate, you can turn your Q so that you get a guaranteed stun right as your opponent comes out of stasis. W gives you some sustain, but the heal is pretty pitiful enough if you don't get to fully mature. So instead of throwing it directly on whoever needs it, it's probably best to put it behind you or even under the turret if you need it. If you're playing against a super roam heavy playstyle, take the time to plant one of these behind your mid laner each time you're in the area. The equivalent of a free health potion being delivered to them can be enough to get the edge that they need to win the lane. E can work up otherwise impossible paths for ganks. Even when it's roaming solo or you're just bringing up a teammate for you for a joint section or operation, just make sure that you're watching which angle that tunnel may open up on. I've seen a fair bit of bards that just get a little bit too hyped and take a one-way magical journey right into someone's enemy tower. Like his E, Bard's R can make some game-winning plays, or doom your team to a total loss, depending on how you use it. It's a type of ultimate that you basically want to see every time it's off cooldown early game to try to look for those picks for those low summoners. If your own lane is playing too passive to engage on, take time to quickly roam up the river and lob an ultimate at the enemy mid laner. As the game progresses, you can start finishing up picks with it, but there are a couple of uses outside of just catching enemies with it. It can function as a team-wide Zhonya's to cancel ultimates like Vladimir or Karthus, and it can be used on allied towers to negate the damage from Rift Herald's charge. Or it can even be used on the enemy turret to turret dive them no matter what happens during that play. Anyway, that's gonna be it for our top 3 champions to main on 11.2. Thank you all so much for bearing in with me. I am so tired. I woke up at 4 a.m. today and now I am up until 11 p.m. and I'm dozing off as I'm reading this, and that's never happened to me. Anyway, I hope you all are enjoying the content. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more content such as this. With all that being said, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.